Today I'm going to do a really short video on how to adjust your Bush Hog on your Mahindra MAX XLT. And you can use this advice on any tractor. I'm going to demonstrate on this tractor, and I'm going to show you a few things that nobody else tells you. By the way, I'm a fourth generation farmer. We've always had a dairy farm. I kind of broke the tradition. I joined the military for 26 years and then I came back. One of the things is bush hogging. We always used to call it a shredder. John Deere used to call them shredders, and then Bush Hog obviously is the name of the company that makes them. This one's a Tebben. This is made in the United States, and it's a good solid 4-foot Bush Hog, and I really like it behind this tractor. This Max 26 XLT will certainly run a 5-footer, no sweat. It's got 26 horsepower, so I can run a 5-footer, but what I run into is two things. One, it sticks out a little bit too far, so it's a little heavy, so it's really too big for the tractor if you're doing any kind of rough land. So 4 foot is about right. If you're doing any really rough cutting with this tractor, it's just not heavy enough for the bigger ones. So I'm sorry all you guys that want to run a 7-footer on your Max XLT. Dangerous. It's just too much weight for that tractor. Anyway, regarding a couple things, you can see this right here is one of the beams on the back, and it's the third top part of the tail. Now you want to make this so that it can go either way, and the reason for that is if you start getting into a ditch, you need to be able to have the tail go up, and similarly if you are driving over hump, you need to have the tail be able to drive down. And the reason for that is that if this doesn't have the flexibility and you get yourself into a little ditch and that won't go up anymore, two things will happen. One, you'll probably break something, or two, you're going to get stuck. Just make sure you got some play here, up or down. The other thing that I want to tell you real quick is these hitches configurations. Now I've had 3 Pats, and every one of them I've sold or thrown in the junk heap because they just fell apart. So I don't recommend the Pats. The quick hitches are kind of neat. My personal preference is either the ball and claw lowered draft links that John Deere has, or at least the flexible extendable links. These quick hitches are kind of cool, and I bought this one as a demonstration for another video. But with this particular Bush Hog right here, you have to unhook the hook to get it through here because it doesn't, this right here is too long to miss this bolt here, so I have to get off anyway. It works all right, but again, I've told you what my favorites are. The slip clutch, I prefer these to a shear bolt. Live around here like in Maine or any place where there's a lot of rocks. You hit something, you've broken it. With the slip clutch, it's a little bit more maintenance because you have to adjust it, but it saves you a lot of money in bolts. Make sure your gearbox has oil in it. You just take this top off and you can kind of stick your finger in there and you'll know if you have oil. So the drive line here, you want to make sure that can telescope in or out. Again, if your tail's coming up, that's going to pull this back. And if you are raising your implement, so if your tail's going down, this whole thing's going to go like this, right? So it's going to extend this. If you raise the hitch up too much and you don't have room to collapse this, you can actually really do some damage to your PTO. One of the things I want to show you in particular is you want to have your top link set so that this is pretty much perpendicular with the ground. You want this part right here to be pretty close. Now some people will put a level on that, and that's ridiculous. We're not grooming a lawn here. So what you really want is you want the back to be maybe an inch or two higher than the front, and the reason for that is you got this blade spinning, and if you don't have a chain or something on the front, you're blowing all that stuff out here. So if it's pitched this way, you're cutting, and instead of the stuff getting blown on the ground, it's all coming back at you. So you want to make this just a little bit. So about 1 or 2 inches is perfect. And then the other thing that I want to show you is this right here. Sometimes with these quick hitches, you can't get the right adjustment, or it just doesn't fit right. So you can get these on Amazon. I don't remember what I paid for it, maybe 30 bucks. The tricky part is it uses the same pin as this right here. So this would go on there, and then I usually go in the middle, and then this goes here. I wouldn't be using this hook. And I have it on right now just because I wanted to demonstrate something to you. Now the float on the tractor, these only have pressure on the up. They don't have down pressure typically. So these are going to float anyway. Your top link, I usually like to have it set. I like the hydraulic one because it's a lot easier to make adjustments. So the top links, they seize up and they bend and everything else. So you want to be real careful about doing that as well. Make sure everything is tight. Make sure everything's greased. Make sure you got room to telescope. Make sure it's set so that it's down a little bit. And if that doesn't work, you want to use this. And like I said, I don't like the pads because they start slopping around and the bolts on them are not grade 5. Next thing you know, you got them hanging all over the place, and something will fall off, or you just, trust me, out in the field when you're really bush hogging into heavy stuff, those pads, they don't hold up. And I'm not a huge fan of these, but I bought this for a demonstration for another purpose. Generally on your 3-point hitches, they typically have an adjustment on this side and not that side. So if you're sitting in the seat, we'd call this the right hand side. If you ever had an old Fordson tractor that came with the original 3-point hitch, the way they always had you hook them up is you'd get off the tractor, you'd hook the non-adjustable end first, and then you could use this one to make adjustments. If you hook this side first, you've used up your ability to make adjustments because that side is fixed. So always hook the non-adjustable side first, and then you won't have really any problems. Make sure your turnbuckles are pretty tight. You don't want a lot of slop going side to side, no more than a couple inches. The last thing is when you set that turnbuckle, and I can tell you right now that I need to tighten up the draft link on the right hand side. It's tipped over quite a bit. You want to take that brush hog and make sure the side to side is reasonably level. You know, we're not doing a golf course with a brush hog, so pretty close, you know. So we just get back and look at it, and if it's at some kind of a weird angle, you make adjustments. So one of the drawbacks of using these quick hitches is you need a bushing. If you don't have a bushing, the lower draft link right here is not going to be sufficient in diameter to not escape through here. So you might start bouncing around a little bit, and the next thing you know, you've got one of these unhooked, and then it can be a little bit of a bear to reattach, especially if you've got a big brush hog or a bush hog on there, you know, trying to get this side hooked back up. And it's also not good for your drive line or anything else. So these bushings, I think they're about $35 a set. And the biggest problem I always had was getting these little roll pins in, so bench vise, and I'll have most of it sticking out except for maybe an inch, and then I'll squish the end of it just a little bit so that when I'm starting to pound with a hammer, it'll go in straight. Because what you'll notice sometimes is if you're trying to pound this end, it's going one way or the other, and then it really gets difficult. So I found that just pinching a little bit on the end gives you a chance to get it good and started in there. Always make sure that you grease your drive line before you start. And one of the things that I do is I also put a little bit of grease on the PTO stub sticking out of the tractor, and that makes it slide on and off a lot better. My personal recommendation is if you don't have a loader on your tractor, get some suitcase weights to put on the weight bracket on the front of the tractor, because you're going to need some stability on that. And so I've got my tires loaded on this tractor, so I always recommend that you load your tires or put wheel weights or some sort of ballast on these things. That'll help you maintain traction and stability, and also make sure that when you're bush hogging that you have your machine in four-wheel drive. This is engaged off, and the reason behind that is if you start coming down a hill, you could start sliding, and the next thing you know, you've lost control of your machine and bad things happen. So always use four-wheel drive when you're bush hogging. If you've got a big heavy utility tractor, it's not quite as important, but these things really don't weigh a whole lot, so whatever you can do to maintain your footing, you want to take advantage of that. So keep your four-wheel drive engaged. You always want to make sure that when you're bush hogging, as much as you can, go forwards. You don't want to be backing up bush hogging too much. I can understand that you're trying to clean up under a tree or a fence or something. You kind of have to back up, but you don't want to be one of those guys that goes this way across the field and then backs up the other way, because what's happening when you're backing up, again, is you're throwing material this way. And you don't want to hit a rock and have that come up and knock you off your tractor. So be careful of that. And then the last thing I want to talk to you about real quick is putting it away. Like, I usually give it a bath real quick. Some people like to paint it. This is going underneath the barn, so I'm not too worried about it really. But I grease everything really well. I don't get too particular about wiping the grease off because it protects the paint, so I pretty much leave it. Make sure you separate your drive shaft, and then I usually spray some Teflon on it, both the male and the female halves of it, and that way it'll all go back together very nicely in the spring. So if you have any questions or you have any comment, I'd love to hear them. Put them down below, and as always, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for watching.